The Minnesota Vikings are 6-1 and recently made a big trade to acquire former Lions tight end TJ Hockenson. Their offense was already loaded with players like Justin Jefferson, Dalvin Cook, Adam Thielen, and more, but now they acquired arguably a top 10 tight end in football. There were a lot of moves at the trade deadline, but this move by the Minnesota Vikings to fully go all in signals a sign of change and that their future is very bright moving forward. It wasn't always like this though, and head coach Kevin O'Connell and GM Kwesi Adofo-Mensah inherited quite a mess this offseason. In 7 short games, they have not only turned the culture around, but the franchise's outlook as well. And we're going to dive into how they did this, why the Minnesota Vikings' future looks bright, and what we can realistically expect from TJ Hockenson as he goes from a 1-6 team in the NFC North to a 6-1 team in the NFC North. And before we get started, I do want to say Sundays are for football, food, friends, and yes, the DraftKings Sportsbook. There's nothing I love more than sitting down on the couch and watching football from 1 p.m. to almost midnight. And this great deal from DraftKings allows new customers to bet $5 on any team to win straight up to receive an additional $200 in free bets if your bet cashes. So in week 9, for example, all Buffalo has to do is beat New York, and using code ANALYSIS with a $5 deposit nets you $200 in free bets. We're nearly midway through the season, and $5 to receive $200 in free bets sounds like a great deal to me. Again, that's using code ANALYSIS, and a big thank you to DraftKings for sponsoring today's video. When looking at the 2022 Minnesota Vikings, the one thing that they've done this year relative to 2021 is win close games. They are 5-0 in one-score games when this video releases, compared to 6-8 in all of 2021. The season started off with a dominant win back in Week 1 over the rival Green Bay Packers, in which Minnesota won 23-7. Justin Jefferson had a season-high 184 yards receiving, and the team played outstanding. Week 2 was obviously a much different story as they lost in Philadelphia on Monday night and were embarrassed in the process with a 24-7 loss at the Link. In the 5 games since, they are undefeated, most recently with a win over the Cardinals, in which Za'Darius Smith was the NFC Defensive Player of the Week as he recorded 3 sacks. What's crazy about this is, while the Vikings currently have the second best record in the NFC, there's one thing the team has said after every one of the 6 wins so far: we'll take a win, but we haven't played our best football yet. And it's true. Look no further than the Week 6 win over the Miami Dolphins when Minnesota went down to South Beach and won with a score of 24-16. There was a Viking that came away with an NFC Player of the Week award, and it might surprise you, but it was rookie punter Ryan Wright. Ryan had, ironically, as this game was played in South Beach, and to quote someone who took their talents there, not 4, not 5, not 6, but 10 punts on the day. And the Vikings in 2021 were notorious for losing games in insane ways. But it's the opposite in 2022. They're finding ways to win. Granted, a lot of them are ugly wins, yes, I'm not shying away from that, but they've scratched and clawed their way to 6-1 by scratching the surface of what this team is truly capable of. They have also faced their fair share of adversity early on, as after coming home from Philly, they faced Detroit on a short week. And I realize the first thought is probably, it's Detroit. But Detroit is a division team for the Vikings, and this same Lions team took the 7-0 Philadelphia Eagles down to the wire and nearly beat them back in Week 1 as they lost 38-35. Detroit is also a team that never gives up and is a true pain in the ass to play. Minnesota was down 14-0 early in the second quarter and battled back to tie it up before halftime. They found themselves down 10 points in the fourth quarter with a score of 24-14 before winning the game 28-24. So in a game they very easily could have rolled over after an ass-kicking in Philly, they overcame 2 double-digit deficits and moved on to 2-1. Detroit, meanwhile, fell to 1-2 and now sit at 1-6 after a Week 8 loss to the Miami Dolphins. The biggest complaint or most frustrating thing about the Vikings in 2022 is they usually get up on teams. Detroit game was obviously an exception, but they usually get up on teams, have a good first drive or two, then kind of fall asleep or lull through the next quarter and a half and wake back up in the middle of the fourth quarter. One big thing to remember here is the Vikings are, in a lot of ways, still in the honeymoon phase with both Kevin O'Connell and Kwesi, meaning even if they were 3-4 or had a losing record, the positive spin you see fan bases have would be brought out. It'd be a lot of, this system is complicated and Kirk needs some time, and you'd have the fan base clashing even more than they already do. But they're not, because winning solves everything, and of course there is some clashing within the Minnesota Vikings fan base. But another reason why the Vikings' future is insanely bright, aside from adding a unit of a tight end in TJ Hockenson, is KOC is still learning how to be a head coach. He doesn't panic under pressure, and this was shown back in Week 5 against the Bears. Minnesota was off to an insanely hot start, as Kirk started off a franchise record 17 of 17 passing, and they were up 21-3 midway through the second quarter. This goes back to them getting off to a hot start, then kind of sleepwalking through the next quarter and a half to wake up in the fourth quarter again. Chicago eventually made it a 22-21 game and took the lead with 9 minutes left to play. I could understand why people would panic at the sound of blowing an 18-point lead to, yes, the Bears of all teams, but Kirk led a fourth quarter game-winning drive, and Cam Dantzler had a game-winning forced fumble on Amir Smith-Marset that sealed the win for the Vikings. One thing I think gets lost is head coaches typically don't become good head coaches overnight, and that they too have to learn how to become a good head coach. It's no different than a rookie quarterback. Yes, they have very, very high football IQs and obviously know the game, but it's different actually being in that position. Bill Belichick was just 36-44 in 5 seasons with the Cleveland Browns in his first head coaching tenure and had just one winning season out of those 5. The positive thing here for O'Connell is he's learning how to become a good head coach while still winning games. This is a rare double positive in this regard. Obviously, the situations are a hell of a lot different, but O'Connell has more wins than Dan Campbell has in a year and a half. O'Connell has a record of 6-1, where Dan has a record of 4-19-1 as the Lions head coach. But bringing in tight end TJ Hockenson only adds to this team, because through the first 7 games, if there's been one weakness for the Vikings offense, it has been the tight end position. Through 7 games, the leading tight end for the Vikings has been Irv Smith, who has just 22 catches for 168 yards and 2 touchdowns. He is averaging just 24 yards per game as the leading tight end and is now out for 8 to 10 weeks with an ankle injury. Irv is in the final year of his contract and has been relatively disappointing since being a second-round pick back in 2019. He has just 88 career receptions and has missed a ton of time due to injury. We, of course, don't hold the injuries against him, but in the grand scheme of things, Minnesota couldn't wait around for him after this injury and hope he gets better and roll with Johnny Munt and Ben Ellefson for the rest of the season. Enter Hockenson, a perfect tight end to complete this offense. TJ is a very good receiving tight end and presents an element in this offense that defenses now have to account for every single game. There was a 58-yard catch he had in Week 8 against the Dolphins, where he ran a very crisp 7 route, ran a long ways after the catch, and nearly broke it for a long touchdown. As simple as this sounds, imagine being a defensive coordinator, heading into a game, and you have to game plan against stopping both Dalvin Cook and Alexander Mattison, who is quietly having a good season, Justin Jefferson, who is on pace for over 1,800 yards receiving, Adam Thielen, KJ Osborne, and now a legitimate weapon at tight end. Hockenson in a lot of ways is a bigger receiver and has run after the catch ability and will benefit with opposing defenses having to focus on other weapons on the team. Tight ends generally take a few years to develop, and TJ is 25 years old and in his 4th season. Of course, there will be a slight transition period learning the Vikings offense, and that's not going to happen overnight, but the sheer talent he has is undeniable. Is TJ a top 2 or 3 tight end in football and in the same conversation with Travis Kelce and Mark Andrews? No, he's not. But TJ to me is a player that's been in some ways underutilized since he was drafted with the 8th overall pick back in 2019. And for the Lions to trade him away for a few pick swaps is underwhelming for their fan base. As for the Vikings and their fan base, this is the type of move championship teams make. I know there's a lot of layup jokes for the Vikings, like congrats on a midseason championship or winning the draft, but pick swapping with a division rival for a Pro Bowl player that's still young while getting better at a position of need and being 6-1 is the type of move winning organizations make. Within this first year under GM Kwesi Adofo-Mensah, the 2022 draft class has not made much of an impact, and this can go both ways. Like, great, there's a lot of busts, but I truly think it's the opposite, where the team is doing good and we haven't seen what the 2022 draft class can do. Unfortunately, first-round safety Lewis Cine is done for the year with an injury, but corner Andrew Booth will at some point add to the secondary, and guard Ed Ingram has been a good run-blocking player. The pass blocking for him I do believe will improve, as it can't get much worse, but he has been a starter for this team for nearly half a season. And at some point, this team will have to move on from Kirk Cousins at quarterback, and I'm not suggesting they do that right now at 6-1 and give up, as much as to say he's 34 years old and we've seen a drastic decline from other older quarterbacks this year across the league. But in 2024, a quarterback, whether that's still Kirk or someone else, would walk into a team with a 25-year-old Justin Jefferson and a 27-year-old TJ Hockenson. And that's just one reason why I love this trade so much for the Minnesota Vikings. You get better, you don't give up a whole hell of a lot, you make a division rival worse, and you increase the distance between you and the second-place team in the division, as you already have a commanding lead in the division through 8 weeks. And a side note, but still a positive, you could see TJ beaming with happiness in his opening press conference with the Minnesota Vikings. To go from 1-6 to 6-1 with a good head coach, a good quarterback that hasn't played his best football in 2022 in Kirk Cousins, to having some of the best amenities a player can have in Minnesota and the ability to compete deep into January for the foreseeable future, this was a spectacular move. And for a team that's 6-1 and is scratching the surface of what they are capable of, the future in Minnesota is very, very bright. And that's all I have for today's video. I hope you enjoyed. If you did, please like the video and subscribe to the channel, as it would mean the world. Until next time, please be safe and have a great day. Love you guys.